Morning, everybody. We're just going to give everyone a minute to hop on in. We've got a big registration list this morning, so we'll give everyone an extra minute here, and then we'll get started. All right, we've got a good little crew to start us off here. Let's get going. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Business Support Series. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Emma Minchevsky. I'm Communications Manager at the Halifax Chamber and your host for this morning. This is my first time hosting a webinar from home, so bear with me. I've got a dog who growls every 10 minutes, and I think we're going to get through it, but just be patient with me. I had to laugh at this webinar's title the first time I saw it, because this time last year when we first went into lockdown, it was one of the first questions I asked myself. I reached out to Rhys and repeated the question to him. Should I start a podcast? Should the chamber start a podcast? So Rhys guided me through the steps. He was quick to answer my long list of questions, and he made the process really easy and fun. We put out 8 episodes last year, and we are getting ready to relaunch it in the fall. I love a lockdown project. Throughout the presentation today, just be sure to drop your questions into the Q&A box. We will get to them. Rhys is the expert here, so take advantage of your time today. Our presenter today is Rhys Waters, co-founder and producer of Podstarter. Rhys launched his first content startup at the age of 22, and that led to creating BAFTA award-winning work for the BBC and working with global brands like Aston Martin and NBC Universal. Rhys has been passionately involved in podcasting since 2014, having developed, launched, and run The Unexplainers, a hit show which eventually became a radio show and a TV series. He has hosted, co-created, and developed hours of podcast content, and his current hit political comedy, Canadian Politics is Boring, is ranked in the top 5 for comedy. Welcome, Rhys. Thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning, and thanks for coming to the seminar. The focus of this is essentially, as Emma said, should you start a podcast? And is a question that people who listen to podcasts are really passionate about podcasts are probably asking themselves, especially as we've kind of entered this third wave in Nova Scotia. It's an accessible way to kind of broadcast and communicate with your customers or your audience or potential clients in a way that you can do it remotely and safely and comfortably right now. So the goal of this seminar is essentially just to give you lots of thought starters for your own projects, some tips, some suggestions about how you can get started with just a smartphone, and then how you can progress from there as well. The agenda is kind of, before you start, listen, telling good stories, gear and equipment, and then reaching your audience. I've tried to keep it simple, and we always try and keep our presentations in kind of this structure. It seems to kind of make the most sense in terms of packaging the information. And again, the Q&A at the end. If there's anything I've missed or skipped over too quickly and you'd like more detail, we can cover over. So I'm Rhys Waters. Emma did a great introduction at the start. I started off working in television in the UK and moved to Canada about 3 years ago. And I've mainly been focused on, I've done video work, but I've mainly been focused on podcasting for the last 18 months. And I've been really lucky to really have some great experiences launching shows and building audiences with the podcasting. And The Unexplainers was a really interesting way to dive into podcasting and get started. It then kind of became a more traditional broadcast. And then I launched Canadian Politics is Boring with Jesse Harley, my co-host, as a lockdown project last year. And the show has just really surprised us both in the growth that it had. But again, we've been able to learn a lot about the industry and audience growth in the process. So just to introduce Podstarter briefly before we go into the talk, we are based in a new studio space. We've moved here in the last month. We're basically just off the Commons at the top of Cornwallis Street, and we have 2 new studio spaces. I'm in Studio 2, which is the smaller studio you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. The studio above that is our largest studio, which is able to accommodate up to about 6 people, and we can live stream from there and do kind of group discussions. Post-COVID, obviously, but once things, the restrictions ease, we're looking forward to welcoming people into the space. And on the left-hand side is a selection of some of our clients. We tend to do podcasts for the purpose of PR, communications, and marketing. A lot of the time, it's part of a wider strategy for businesses and organizations. and the way that we approach podcast production is in three sections, really. We break our services down into pre-production and designing the actual show and how it's hosted, the development of the content, the recording, the creative services around editing it. And then a huge part of what we do is help people distribute podcast content so that it reaches a wider audience. I'll go into a bit more detail. We have a whole other talk we do about content strategy inspired by a podcast. But the idea of making your podcast visible on all the platforms that people are using is a real essential part of a launch. So I'm guessing that I don't need to answer this question if you've signed up to this. If you don't know what a podcast is, it's there's a very kind of direct description there on the slide. I'm hoping that all of you have listened to a podcast, or at least thought about what a podcast is and how we might use it before this talk. But I didn't want to make any assumptions. So a podcast is essentially an audio file that you stream or download. It tends to be pure audio. There are video podcasts. There's lots of other kind of methods of like live streaming that can then be turned into podcasts. But at its essence, it's a piece of audio content that you can access for listening through headphones typically, or in a car, and it's kind of evolved from there in so many different ways. But that was the kind of the starting point for podcasts back in the day, when people were downloading them from iTunes to put on iPods before smartphones could host them, for instance. And I wanted to start with this question because this is the question everybody, or not everybody, but a large portion of people seem to think that podcasting is a get-rich-quick scheme. And we always try and let people know that this is not a foregone conclusion. There are podcasters who do launch shows and make a lot of money suddenly, and there are the Joe Rogans who sign deals with Spotify for hundreds of millions of dollars. But the experience of most podcasters is very different, and the ability to monetize the show is very different. It's not a realistic goal for every show. It's not a foregone conclusion. It's much like saying, well, why don't you set up a hit YouTube channel and make income from it? Or why don't you set up a huge kind of following on Instagram and monetize that? It's very much a it's a long game to play. It takes a lot of investment to get a show and to build an audience, and you can get there. But we tend to say that podcasts have much wider uses and much more purpose and realistic kind of uses with communications and marketing and PR, and also appealing to a niche audience, or having a really direct conversation with people really need your content or really want to listen. So if you are thinking of starting a podcast, the best thing to do first is to listen to podcasts, especially podcasts that you think are going to allow you to get ideas and inspiration for the kind of show you would like to do, things you like about those shows, things that you don't. And one of those things that you'll come across when you start looking at other podcasts is the fact that there are so many that are already out there. And this is the latest stat I've seen, is like 850,000 active podcasts, 30 million episodes in so many different languages. And it can be a bit daunting to think, well, is there any room for me to launch a podcast? Has that already become too saturated? But in the context of how many blogs, how many YouTube channels, or how many websites there are, nobody is saying don't launch a YouTube channel, don't do a blog, don't have a website. There are still huge amounts of opportunities, and podcasting has grown really fast, but it doesn't mean that there aren't an infinite number of niches or audiences out there that you can kind of start to build that is relevant to your expertise or the passionate topic that you want to talk about. So don't be disheartened if you kind of look out there and you see other shows that are already talking about the topic that you want to talk about. I would say that there are multiple podcasts, like Canadian Politics is Boring. There are a lot of podcasts that talk about the same topics as us, but we do it in our style and we talk about it in a very different way. And sometimes an audience will listen to both or choose one over the other. But you have the ability to craft a show that will speak to people in a way that they can relate to emotionally and enjoy your content. So don't be afraid to kind of launch that show, or at least explore the ideas of launching that show, as long as you're considering the fact that it's unique and different, and you can put your own spin on it. And these are three stats that I wanted to share that kind of will really help hammer home why it's worth seriously considering. So again, more than half of consumers, and this stat I think is a year old, It's now become a mainstream thing to listen to podcasts and to consume podcasts. And then the 3 out of every 4 listen to learn. That purpose behind listening, I find really interesting. And I think that a lot of people, you do get very passionate audiences around shows that are teaching or educating, and that might be history, or it might be business skills or marketing tips, or it might be knitting techniques, for instance. It could be anything. I think that there are people tend to gravitate towards shows that feed their passions, or they find communities that are underserved in mainstream media. So knitting is a good example. There are quite a lot of podcasts about knitting. If that's your thing, then you find your crowd and you find your weekly knitting podcast that you just can't not listen to for I don't know, all those latest stitches or whatever you might get out of it. And the one of the big reasons that advertising money has started to flow heavily into podcasting is the level of engagement. I'll go into why it's so potent as an advertising tool. One of the things you do find is that people who really buy into your show and what your conversation or the subject matter you're covering, they are very passionate and they're very loyal. And there's a way that the way that podcasting works is you're kind of building a community around your show, and being aware of that and how you can nurture that audience and become familiar to them is really important. So there are huge amounts of choices and genres to look into. So when you start kind of looking for your show and looking at how you might launch your show, there are these kind of choosing the right genre and choosing the right kind of section to go into when you label your show on Spotify or Apple can really help. So for instance, if you're doing a business show but you'd like to come from it from a perspective of creativity, you could always launch it in the arts section and reach a different audience so that it doesn't get shown typically with other business shows. Or maybe it's a combination of business in sport. If you kind of manage a basketball team, you might want to do a business show in the business category, because that's a different flavor, even though it's covering a sports topic. There's ways you can straddle different genres, and sometimes podcasters don't give this a lot of thought. It's a last minute thing that they tick the box of, and especially in Canada as well, there's a huge amount of opportunity to become the number one or in the top 10 of a genre, because Canadian podcasting has typically been dominated by a lot of US content, but that's starting to change, and Canadian listeners are starting to engage with Canadian content. So there's an opportunity to kind of be at the forefront domestically in that sense. The most popular topic is comedy, and that's the most competitive one. When I first launched Canadian Politics is Boring, I listed us as government because that was a very underserved genre in Canada, and we got in the top 10 even with very few downloads. And then we switched over to comedy because we were like, well, this is more of a comedy show, this isn't really a government show, and suddenly we were barely breaking through to the top 200 when we first launched. So it's choosing that genre and the popularity around them. One of the biggest rises and one of the podcast genres that is getting a lot of advertising money and growth at the moment is sports. So that's one to keep your eye on, and one that is definitely kind of a growth genre for the future. So when you're listening to those podcasts out there that maybe give you that inspiration, structure, pace, and duration are really important. So business shows tend to be shorter because they try to fit their show in around the busy entrepreneur's schedule, so they can get the latest updates on new social media kind of trends in 15 minutes while they're on their walk to work, or while they're doing some workout or whatever it might be. Voice, tone, and chemistry, be honest with yourself, record your voice, listen back to you. How do you sound? Do you need a co-host? Do you need a group? Do you need a third voice? How can you kind of complement the chemistry? You really want people to feel like they're in the room and they're participating in the conversation with you, and they're feeling like they're they're with friends, or they're with company that they're enjoying the conversation of. So really frame the kind of the way you talk to people, and how the information is delivered in that way is a really key component to a podcast success. And then be honest with yourself about the topic. some celebrities launch podcasts where they talk about doing laundry and painting a fence, and they get huge downloads because people are already engaged with who they are. Think about what the reason people would listen to your show and what they're going to get from you that they can't get anywhere else. Really honing that as your offering will help with growth. If you don't have an audience already when you launch a podcast and you're expecting them to listen to you talking about kind of everyday things, you need to make sure that you're doing it in a way that is unique, or that you're adding a huge amount of information or learning or insight that they can't get anywhere else. And audio quality and packaging, there's some shows where the audio quality is terrible, but the content is so amazing, people don't care. But you want to think about the listener experience, and the better the audio you can get. And this doesn't mean buy, a $500 microphone. This means just really thinking about your environment and really engaging with tips to record good audio. Can really just elevate the experience for a listener. There are so many podcasts I've listened to where I've shut it down after 5 minutes just because I'm getting a headache from background noise or reverb, or they're just so far away from the microphone I can barely hear them. Or even, especially with the remote records, you'll get one guest at a different volume from another, so when one talks I have to turn it up, and then when the other guest talks I'm deafened. It's really important to kind of listen back and kind of just test your setup as well before you launch anything. And if you do have an audience on Instagram or Twitter or anywhere else already, you can really use that as a great starting point. I would say that weirdly, sometimes you can get almost two separate things that a podcast audience can exist. So the Unexplainers, for instance, we never really got a big social media presence, but our audience in the UK and the US was pretty big, but we could never get them to jump across to the social media. That barrier from 5 years ago seems to be dropping now, where the cross-pollination between those platforms is much more tangible, I think. So if you have been working hard building an audience on a particular platform, you can really use that as leverage to get your show give your show a really good kickstart. And then the other thing to think about is the other shows that you look at, the shows that you're kind of comparing yourself to. Are they still posting? You might think that show has the title you wanted, they have the style of artwork you wanted, they've got the tone. It's surprising how many shows online are dead, which means they haven't posted in a long time, but they still show up in search terms. And if they had a big audience and a big back catalog, sometimes shows that are no longer operating will show before your podcast. So you're not just competing with active podcasters, you're competing with podcasters from the past as well. And there's been a lot of uproar about this, I think Apple are changing their platform to try and promote more active accounts, much like you would on other platforms as well. So at its core, so I'm aware my face keeps changing color as I'm changing to the slide. Sorry. At its core, the real appeal of podcasting is telling stories, and I think that the audio medium has two real benefits. First of all, if as someone who worked in television, if I had a low budget in TV, you could see it on the screen. If I wanted an animatronic dinosaur, it was going to look terrible because I would have to make it myself. Whereas if you want a dinosaur in your podcast, you just can get some good quality sound effects and leave the rest to the listener's imagination. The other element is that it ties into the old oral traditions of storytelling that are kind of intrinsically linked with how we used to share information before the digital age and before print, which would have been stories around a campfire or around a dinner table. The way that people used to tell stories and the reasons they used to tell stories. The Aboriginal Australians, their stories tend to be directions through the desert to find key landmarks. There's the way that people remember things from that kind of verbal storytelling. I always use the example as well of those people who do memory demonstrations where they can remember a ridiculous number of objects on a table they've only looked at for 2 minutes, and then they pull the cloth over and then they tell you exactly what was on there. A lot of the technique they use is they tell a story. So each object they try and remember will have a story in their heads that links them together. The brain is just hardwired to really kind of absorb information and retain knowledge, especially around that kind of story structure. So having that as a tool in podcasting and really connecting with people on that level is really effective. And the other benefit as well is the honesty. So having directed documentaries to people who've never been on camera before and were terrified. That lens is such an intimidating thing for some people. Even some people who are great at doing presentations like this, they freeze up, or in person, they're larger than life. You put a camera on them and they just kind of shrink. Podcasting, and I learned this when I started doing radio just before the Unexplainers, say about 2013. I started doing some BBC radio projects. People relax so much faster with a microphone. They're not aware of how they look and how that makes them feel. So the one of the secrets of podcasting and getting interviews with people who voices or perspectives you really want on your show is one of the benefits, is really that people are able to just be calm, relax, and be more honest and more authentic in a way that you can't you can get, but you need more time. I think people drop their guard a lot faster when it's just a microphone and it's conversational. And there are so many different ways to format your show. The top four, I would say, are, I round them up as being quite similar in terms of the production style. So monologue, multi-host, interview, and roundtable. That is people in a room talking, essentially. And we do, my comedy show is that. We do a lot of projects that fit that bill, and I would say that is almost a very similar production method. The bottom two are the ones that are a lot more complex, a lot more difficult. So the narrative, scripting, actors, drama, sound design. Same with the documentary. That's a much more it's not conversational. It would be based on interviews, but might be interspliced with music and historical audio or whatever you can find. So there's a few different ways of building things. I love the bottom two just because of the ambition of them and the kind of experimentation with storytelling. They tend to be larger budget, and they tend to be the kind of podcast that larger brands would launch because they have the ability to pay script writers and everything, for instance. But if you have those skills yourself, you can also do that. And I think that being honest to your show, be honest to your audience about the kind of show you want to make, and just make the show you want to make. I think if people turn up and they hear that you're really passionate about this idea and that you're really invested in it and you have a really real vision that you want to achieve, Welcome to Night Vale is a very weird show. If you've ever listened to it, it's about it's updates from a small radio station in a fictional town in the desert in America where weird things happen all the time. It's very dark and very dry, but they've got a huge audience. They grew, and it's because they made the show that they wanted to make. It's very particular and very unique, but it's not mainstream at all. It would never have been made by like a mainstream broadcaster or platform necessarily, unless someone was really taking a chance on them. And that is a kind of a testament to the fact that they really knew what they wanted to do and they saw it through, and other people just appreciated that, and the audience collected around it. So that authenticity of buying into your idea and really being invested in why you're there is a key ingredient to getting a loyal listenership, I think. And also thinking about how you're pitching what you're talking about to an audience is really key. So the idea of is this a podcast by experts for experts, or is this a podcast by experts for people who are interested in the topic but maybe quite new to it, and you're kind of you might be breaking down complex legal jargon for an audience, or you might be talking to other lawyers about specific legal jargon that has real relevance to a particular audience. There's no right or wrong way, but thinking about who their audience is and how they're going to listen is really important. Even if you're not an expert and you're going on a journey of I want to learn about this topic, the audience will come for the ride too, because they might be like, oh yeah, I've never learned about that. So especially with Canadian politics, is boring. I don't know anything about Canadian politics. Jesse is apathetic, and my co-host, and doesn't care about politics. And every episode is me learning something and then teaching him. So neither of us are experts. It's a topic I'm passionate about, and then Jesse has fun making fun of. But there was a clear idea in our heads about, well, our audience will probably be people who aren't into politics and are just there for to learn a little bit, but also just mainly be entertained and come away with a few bits of information that maybe is educational. At least that's what we try and do. So. And there are only really I'd say three things to start. I put I've said three things to start, but it's kind of four really. A lot of people say art, title, and teaser, but I've put description in there as well. So if you wanted to launch a podcast after this talk, if you had a photo, you had a name, and you had a single piece of audio that might just be a little trailer of you've recorded saying, "Hey, this is me, this is my show, please tune in." You could launch your show within 20 minutes, and it would appear on Apple and Spotify within 24 hours. The other thing that I've added in there is the description, because you need to have a well-written description as well that really kind of teases out a bit more detail. The artwork and the title are the thing that grabs people's attention, and then the description is the thing that helps them make a more informed choice once they've clicked on your title. It's very simple to launch. That's literally all you need to actually get going, using some of the apps I'll talk about later. But it's not complicated, but we tend to encourage people to put a lot more thought than just kind of going and launching and doing it, obviously. But it's a very simple, affordable process to get going. And the artwork is tough. It's so competitive, and getting an artwork that stands out against all these other designs, it's really a masterclass in how do you communicate the tone, the style, the topic, who the hosts are, with a title and with the artwork. You can change your artwork as time goes on, which I'm a big fan of people evolving their show and kind of tweaking it as time goes on to improve it. It really is important to kind of look at the examples out there and then see how you can really hone in your design and make it work. There's so many podcasts out there where people just get a photo, they put the title on, they might do it on Canva or an app on their phone, and they launch, and that's fine to get going. But really consider what somebody who has no idea about who you are and what your show is, what are they going to think and what are they going to feel when they see your title? How do you expect them to click on it if you don't put that kind of level of thought and that level of kind of detail into it? And I would recommend, if you do have a budget, or if you are a designer, to use those skills or bring that person in, because as a process, it can be really interesting to see how you can make it stand out stylistically on that basis. And also, when you think about that title, it's really important to kind of I would say that the title, a lot of people go for titles that are obscure, that need explanation. I personally like titles that will give people an insight as to what the show is. I think that, especially with Canadian Politics is Boring, that name came from the point that we were doing a comedy show about Canadian politics and people would assume it would be boring, which was our kind of bet. So we wanted to own that. So the first time they saw it, the reaction, we already answered that question and owned the instinct they might have. Unless you do find it interesting, then maybe we put you off. But we were betting on the fact that most people say that to us, and that's the kind of a joke that Canadians make, and we wanted to kind of run with it. So think about that first emotion that people will have, that first reaction of, first of all, will they know what it's about, and also will they get an idea of tone too? Gear and equipment. I'm going to talk about a few different kinds of pieces of kit and equipment and platforms, and they'll all be on there. But if you need to reach out afterwards and get some specific recommendations to your needs, don't be afraid to. So there is an app you can download for free called Anchor. It's owned by Spotify, and I wanted to start with this before I got into more complicated, expensive gear, because Theo has launched a podcast. He's homeless, and he does a show interviewing other people on the streets in LA, and all he needs is a smartphone, and the podcast is amazing and compelling, and he is having these conversations with people with very little budget, no post-production. He is just using an app on a phone, and it's incredible for that to be an opportunity for somebody to broadcast in a perspective that only he can cover. It's not a perspective. It would be covered very differently by a journalist or somebody who isn't living the life that he lives. So on that basis, it's just a really good example of how podcasting and starting to broadcast is a very affordable, easy kind of marketing tool that you can launch. There's no rocket science to kind of actually appear on those major platforms. So a lot of people will invest money in different setups. There are some good examples on here of different kinds of microphones, different kind of ways you can treat spaces in your house or offices. The middle lower image of the microphone with a white background, that's a Blue Yeti. They are very affordable. They're about $150 and they sound really good. Microphone snobs will hate me for saying this, but I think they're a very good investment and a good starting point. The Blue Snowball is the cheaper one. It's like $70. I still think that's really good it's just a USB that you plug in your laptop is a great way to get started. And the bottom right-hand corner is essentially a pillow fort. And a lot of people don't realize how well how improved the sound can be, from a pillow fort. You can make that sound like a studio just by having blankets and cushions around you. It's all about reverb and echo. So if you record, for instance, in your kitchen, it's going to sound very bad because there's a lot of hard surfaces. There's a lot of audio bouncing around. You go to a closet full of clothes, that'll sound better. But if you can build a little pillow fort like that, you will look silly. Your kids will love it, but it will sound good as well. One of the things that gave the Unexplainers a big differentiator from other podcasts at the time was that it was an improvised comedy show recorded in the real world. So we would climb mountains, we would be on boats, we would be on the road in a vehicle. I love location audio. I think it's challenging. It's quite exciting for a listener to be there on the road with you or on a hike or whatever it may be. I love the format, especially if you're doing, say, for instance, there's a lot of podcasts about interviewing entrepreneurs. Well, imagine if post-pandemic you were going into coffee shops, speaking to the owner and having a coffee with them in their coffee shop and getting the ambience and the sound of that environment. It's challenging because it will be loud and you'll have to work hard to get the sound good, but it will really electrify the process and make the listener feel like they're there with you. So there are upsides and downsides to it. A lot of those smaller recorders, some of them are expensive, some of them are like $100 or $150. There are lots of different options to look at, and you can go to somewhere like Long and McQuaid locally, or you can order online, but there are lots of different options to look at and different features. But ultimately, I consider it's intimidating. It might not be your first step, but I really like the texture that you can give your audio by being out in the real world. Editing is often the downfall of many podcasts. Some people love the recording, they love the guests, they love the camaraderie and the fun you can have, and then the editing is the thing that really bogs people down. If you are really geeky about editing, you get excited about it like I do, then I don't understand that. I just love it. I love mixing the audio. I love playing with music and sound effects. It's kind of, but it's quite a niche thing. Not everybody wants to do that. So there are lots of different tools. The top left-hand corner is Audacity, which is free and open source and a fantastic kind of starter. Well, actually, I say starter. There's some major podcasts that still use it. It's capable of doing a lot, but it's free. So if you wanted to get going, GarageBand, the top middle, that's a free with every Mac. And again, a really simple drag and drop starter where you can put your music into. And then you've got Logic in the top right hand corner, which is the Apple's slightly more sophisticated software that you do have to pay for, but it, again, takes it up a level from GarageBand. I use Audition, which is the bottom left hand corner, which is an Adobe product. There is Pro Tools, which is another one that is used professionally, and it's kind of a professional package. But if you ever get to that level, there's some amazing things you can do with audio. Like you can paint out a door slam in the middle of someone's words as they're talking, and no one would ever have known it was there. It's some really there's ways you can fix audio and treat audio and add effects in there that is mind-blowing sometimes. And then Soundtrap is a platform that is being introduced by Spotify. They seem to have bought everyone, and Soundtrap allows you to essentially edit a podcast by editing the text. So it transcribes the audio, and then you can edit the text like you would a Word document, as in you can drag it around. So you can't like retype to make them say something else, but you can copy and paste and shift things around. So if you're new to editing, I haven't tested it myself. I don't know how good the technology is, but if they manage to get it right, then I could see that being a really great accessible way for people to begin the edit process. You can avoid all this by paying someone to edit, and there's a lot of people do it online. Some of our clients, we just do the editing for them. They record, they send us the file, we send them back something polished, and then go from there. There's you don't have to spend a fortune getting editing done either. It's not too expensive, and you can offset the cost, or I suppose you could offset the time you would spend editing on them marketing your show, which might be a better investment of your time than creating lots of spin-off content for social media, rather than 3 hours pulling your hair out trying to understand the process that you might not enjoy or get used to. You need to host an RSS feed to post your podcast, and there's lots of different options here. The Anchor app I told you about earlier with Theo and his show, that podcast app automatically generates that for you. All of these apps also create the RSS feed, and the RSS feed is much like a blog, where your blog can be reposted and updated remotely from that one feed. Essentially, you upload to, say, Libsyn, for instance. If you were on Libsyn, you might upload to Libsyn, and then it would automatically distribute to Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, all of those platforms, Google Home, Alexa. It's just a central hub where you control and paste your text and upload your show for releases. You kind of schedule it, and then you set up the back end of like, hey, I want to be in the sports category, or whichever categories you want to be on different platforms from there too. Like, there are a lot of free ones. So Podbean is free. And then you can upgrade for like advanced statistics and support. Some of them have like a basic paid package. I would say that, again, if you're going to do this on a low budget and try it out, go for one of the free options like Anchor and Podbean. You can migrate your show onto a more sophisticated platform later on if you get really serious about it. Now, a lot of you, if you do launch, and a lot of our clients right now are obviously doing this remotely, and there's lots of different ways to connect remotely with people. We use Zencaster, and also Squadcast is another one. So what that allows you to do is, it's almost like this, like Zoom. You can record over Zoom like this to do your podcast. Squadcast and Zencastr is different from Zoom in that they're optimized just for podcasting. They also allow you to do video record, so you can have a video feed if you wanted to do like a YouTube version. But the difference with Squadcast and Zencastr is they will record through the browser a hard copy of a high quality hard copy of audio locally for each user, and then upload them at the end. So if there's any interference online with your signal, you still have, it doesn't drop out in the middle, if you see what I mean. If you are going to use Zoom, then get a backup. So record over Zoom, but also get the other person and yourself to record on QuickTime or voice recorder, so you have a high quality hard copy on your laptop or on your computer, just in case you do lose the signal. Because if everybody else is working from home and streaming Netflix and everything else, the signal does suffer sometimes. So you just want to have the actual connection as a reference for the conversation, as a monitor feed, and then to get a hard copy for those files to be exchanged afterwards will give you a much more high quality mix. The amount of times that we've had to help people kind of take out those digital artifacts that get added by a poor Wi-Fi signal, for instance, it really does change the listening experience, and would have been avoided if someone had, recorded locally to use that instead. Reaching your audience is, I think that reaching your audience and kind of marketing your show is one of the things we get asked about the most, where people have launched their show and they don't know how to attract listeners to it. So we do a whole talk, which I mentioned earlier, about feeding a content strategy with a podcast. And I can send this and go through this diagram with anyone if they want, but essentially when you record a podcast, there are multiple opportunities to generate content, talk about what you're doing, why you're doing it, when you're doing it, the fact you've done it, while you're doing it, and then use it to network with guests and use their social media feeds to integrate with yours and the podcast too. There's so many different ways that you're able to kind of build off this. And also really feed, if you're struggling for content for your social media feeds, this is a really useful way to not only be present in podcasting, but then also have lots of things to talk about on a regular basis. If you decide to do a weekly show, for instance, you will have way more content than you can use from the podcast in that sense. Show notes are a vital part of podcasting. So I would say that a lot of the time people don't build a website or add a section to their website about their podcast, and you can do that with a blog function. So every time you're doing a new podcast, you launch a blog post with the show notes. And is the reason you can kind of really enhance the experiences. You can refer to the show notes. You can say, I'm talking about this topic, and if you go to the show notes, there's a link there and you'll find more information. So you can actually drive traffic to your website through the podcast. You can also give people lots of options and actions to take within that, the show notes too, and it's just an enhanced experience for people. You can put links to your guests, you can put links to the articles you've done your research in, and then also it really allows you to kind of have a thorough process and another learning resource. And then people browsing your website might look at your show notes and discover your podcast the other way. I've given Astonishing Legends a podcast from the US that I'm good friends with. They do great show notes. They do these really thorough investigations into mysteries, and they always have the most thorough show notes on where you can find every bit of information they talk about. Their show's grown enough that is their full-time job, so they have the time to do it. But it's a really good example of what you can do to enhance the kind of experience for listeners and drive further traffic. If you really go down the angle of having a niche show, that is really helpful because you will know where to find your communities, where you'll be able to find communities that will be inclined to enjoy your podcast. So again, like Living Off Grid, Wilderness Living, for example, these are just some screenshots I did of different groups. If you're doing a show that is really relevant to that, then you can go to those groups and find guests. You can go to that group and share your podcast. You can go to that group and find out new trends. You can really participate in those communities and start direct them over to your podcast as well. The more niche you are, the more direct you can be in where you start promoting your show. So don't be afraid to, or at least don't underestimate how powerful that can be, to kind of really start feeding into the growth of your show and tapping into something. Those communities might be looking for the podcast. You might be the podcast of their dreams, and they might want to be guests. They might promote your show. They might feel at home, and discovering your show could be a real revelation for that community, for instance. Pull quotes is just a term we use to talk about grabbing a quote from within one of your podcast guests' speech or from something you've said, where it might be something that is relevant or works really well as a quote, and then you can essentially just create very easily a visual to go with it and post it. I think the example on there was one I put together on my phone in like 2 minutes. Just as an example, using PixArt, and Canva's great as well. You think about how many conversations you'll be having and how long you'll be talking for, the chances of you finding really cool nuggets of information and quotes that you can pull from it is huge. Even in a 30-minute interview, there might be, if you've got a great guest who just talks really nicely and is a real expert in their field, or you're the expert in your field, you can really get a lot from building these and do them really quickly. You can listen back to your show and just pause, make another one, pause, make another one. Is a very simple process, even just using your phone. The other one is audiograms. So we've had a lot of success with audiograms because video is obviously optimized in algorithms for promotion on a lot of social media channels, and it also gives people a real taste of the voice of a guest. So if you have a really profound or important or just insightful 30, 60-second clip, whatever it may be, and you pull it out and create a video from it with transcription. The example on here is the show we do for Charm Diamond Centers, the Canadian Love Map, and you're instantly you're getting the transcription for the kind of autoplay on mute, and you're also seeing the waveform that will move as people talk. The engagement we had with Charm with this content on social media was way bigger than the podcast, where it kind of the reach it had and the way it captures people's attention. The podcast has grown amazingly. We're really happy with it, but we were getting hundreds of thousands of impressions on Facebook for these kind of really emotional little clips from the stories we were telling. And again, in a 30-minute interview, you might have a lot of opportunities to create this kind of content too. And again, you don't need a lot of software to do this, or expensive software. I started doing them in After Effects, and then this tool came along called Headliner. And Headliner is free, and you can create them really easily in your browser. It's an amazing tool. You can, if you're a guest on somebody else's podcast, you can actually just type in their podcast, find the episode you're in, and create your own video content. You can drop photos behind. You can choose the colors to match your brand and the fonts and everything as well. Some features you do need to pay a monthly subscription on Headliner to kind of unlock additional features, but you can do a really good job just using the free version as well. So even if you haven't got a podcast, but you've been a guest on other people's podcasts, you could go away from this talk and start creating your own audiograms for your LinkedIn or other social media platforms. Now, a text version, we were using Temi. There's loads of different sites. There's Otter, I think, is free. You can pay a human to do it, which costs slightly more, but sometimes it's nicer than using the kind of the auto-generate tools. The text version, I would say, having a transcription of the full podcast interview allows you to build that on your website. So if you want to have SEO and the text is important to part of your strategy, you can create blog posts or have it on your website. In that sense, you can post it on LinkedIn, and also I like the accessibility of it for people who are hard of hearing or are unable to enjoy a podcast. They can always read the interview too. So that's always a nice thing to add on for kind of for podcasters to kind of do. And also then it gives you a huge amount of content for a blog strategy as well. In that sense, you think if you're doing a 30-minute interview every week, you've got a really nice blog post there that you can add your own comments to, or you can break it down into a few chunks, or even use this to generate thought pieces based on sections of the text too. Another thing we would suggest once you get going is to be a guest on other people's shows. I was on Dwayne's show, Art Pays Me. He interviews creative people. He's now got Craft Pays Me, where he's interviewing people who do craft as well. It's just nice to cross-pollinate podcasts and have podcasters on your show and vice versa. It tends to be a very open community. People don't see each other as competition because their audience is so loyal that their audience will listen to their show and they might try yours and they might stay with both of you. It seems to be that the way that podcasting works, where you build a community around your show, you don't lose a customer in that sense. If someone is being exposed to another show, it's almost like they appreciate the fact that you're introducing them to something that they might find they enjoy just as much as yours, and are grateful that you're kind of introducing them to shows they might enjoy. The bottom left-hand corner, I've got a chart that shows, you can see the little jump where the download figures for the Unexplainers goes up to 1,000 in one day nearly. And that was me doing a guest slot on Astonishing Legends. And they have, I think, they've had a ridiculous, I think they were over 100 million downloads. And the jump that it gave just by being a guest on their show, you can see how the data kind of changes as through the rest of August thereafter, as people were listening to their show, hearing me on the show and then checking it out. It's one of the fastest ways to grow your show, is to just aggressively approach people and be on their show. And we've actually, it's become such an effective strategy. We're now starting to offer that as a service, where we will do the networking and present you to shows that you might suit or be beneficial to as well. It's a real area where even if you don't want a podcast but you want to be on podcasts, you could just be a full-time guest on people's shows if you have something really good to offer them. So this quote from Alex from Gimlet Media. Gimlet is a real success story. They built a podcast company that was focused on just creative content, and they got bought out, and they've set a real industry standard for high quality in terms of content. The heart of this quote is basically talking about the fact that the relationship you have, if you remember the campfire, if you remember that kind of the relationship that you can generate with a listener, by being in their ears on a regular basis, by being part of their lifestyle. So there are podcasts I will listen to when I jog. There are podcasts I will listen to when I walk my dog. There's podcasts I'll listen to when I drive. And often I map it out based on how long they are. By the time I drive to work, I will have finished this show. And you become, especially if you release on a regular basis, you become a fixture of people's lives. And that is a really unusual thing to get these days. To get the undivided attention of someone for like 30 to 40 minutes or however long your show is every week or every month is a real unusual thing to get. Everyone talks about attention spans and shorter content on everything else. Podcasting is doing the opposite. It is the long form, and it is people committing and actively listening for a serious amount of time. So if you can kind of use these tools and these skills, you can really start to see a dramatic effect on your relationship with the listeners. And this kind of listener pyramid kind of shows the level of how you might progress with listeners. So strangers are people who don't listen to your show and haven't found it yet. I never heard of you. So that will be the majority of the human race will make up that group. Listeners are people who then have given you a chance, maybe hit play, maybe were casual about it, maybe they were distracted or they weren't quite listening, maybe they instantly weren't buying into the tone or the chemistry. It wasn't for them, which is fine, because even if you can get a small percentage of people to kind of take the next step and subscribe and become a regular listener, you can't expect everyone to be won over by your content. Even Joe Rogan, who is like the biggest podcast in the world, I guess, there's even more people who don't like his show than like them. He's just got a big enough audience that does love his show. And then fans are the kind of the thing you really want to aim for, and the group of people you really want to nurture, because they will be the lifeblood of your show being promoted and talked about. I think like 63% of podcast discovery comes from recommendations. So those fans are the people who will recommend your show to their family, to their colleagues, to the people they play hockey with. It's those are the people that really matter to your show, and the people you need to look after and nurture, whether it's replying to their emails, whether it's sharing behind the scenes jokes and things with them on social media, really taking the time to kind of let them know that they are part of a community and that you appreciate them choosing your show over all the other choices they have in terms of all the other content that exists in the world that is being generated, and that the fact they give you so much time to listen. You should never take your audience for granted, because their participation and development, their assistance in helping you develop the show is really important. We've for Canadian Politics is Boring, we're just going through a process of finding new sponsors, and we're thinking of doing a premium model where we have some bonus episodes that are behind a paywall. But before we even do that, we're actually putting a questionnaire out to our listeners to say, how does this, are you okay with this? Are you comfortable with us going down this model? How do you feel about it? Just because our show wouldn't really exist in the way that it does without them. So they're giving them the opportunity to let us know how they feel about this is really important to us, because we want them to be behind us and supportive, because they're the people who will enable that paywall to make sense, if you see what I mean. It's a very hands-on approach with your audience, and making them comfortable and appreciated is vital to nurture. I love this slide. I don't know if anyone's a fan of The Office. I actually prefer the American one more than the British one, which is a controversial opinion, as a British person especially. But the idea of inside jokes and people being part of that is really powerful, because what you find is listeners who feel like they're part of a club and that they have T-shirts and no jokes that their favorite podcast does is a really weirdly powerful thing that we found. So merchandise is something that once you build a really engaged audience, you can start selling. And the thing I would say with merchandise is that you don't make that much money, but what it does give you is a real indication of how much people care about your show. If they're willing to buy and then wear and post online artwork from your podcast, that is it still blows my mind that people do that. People are kind of so engaged in something you've created, but it is a really good indication of how invested people are, and how loyal they are to your show. It can really make a big difference in understanding, whether you're getting through to people. And also it's free advertising if they do, and you can make a little bit of money at the same time. And then you get things like the fan art. It's like really engaged audiences will send you incredible fan art, for instance. So the Unexplainers, that top left-hand corner, that's an incredible piece of art that someone sent us, inspired by the show, that we actually used in some of our marketing. And an engaged audience will do this kind of thing. They will send you, they'll send you gifts. They'll email you. We actually recently got asked to do a happy Mother's Day message for somebody's mother as a video chat. It's so bizarre, the kind of level of engagement that you see. So when you start to have that audience from a marketing point of view and from a comms point of view, they're spending time with you on a regular basis and giving you a mind-blowing amount of time. If they give you half an hour a week, that's still crazy for some stranger you've never met to listen to your voice for 30 minutes. There's trust because they feel like they know you. It tends to be quite an authentic process of doing a podcast. So if your customers or your clients are your audience and they really like your content, it further enhances the growth of trust that you have with them. And then it's building advocates. So people who will actively go out and promote your business and promote your services and what you're doing. So it's a really powerful tool. If you get it right, if you build that audience in the right way, you can then, have an audience that you're not marketing to necessarily, you're building a community with. So for a business of any size to start to nurture a community like that around their services or their purpose or whatever they're doing, it can really lead to kind of the amazing potential that you might never have expected with a show. And that's kind of it. I'm good for a Q&A. I hope that was useful and that everyone found it insightful.
That was great, Rhys. Thank you so much. We just have a couple minutes for questions because I feel like every question I had, you already answered. So that's perfect. So I'm going to run through the audience questions. And I just put something in the chat. I wanted to hear from people on what their favorite podcasts are, because often at the end of a podcast, they will say, and you should tell a friend about this podcast. So my favorite one is Stuff You Should Know. I love that podcast. They have quick versions that are only 10 to 15 minutes, or we have the full 45-minute versions where you just learn about random stuff. It's a lot of fun. So that's my favorite. And I'm going to listen to Rhys's too, because I haven't listened to that one yet. So, in one of your first slides, you had mentioned those stats about more than half of Americans listen to podcasts. Would you say Canadian stats are similar, comparable?
Canadian stats are a couple of years behind. If for some reason the Canadian audience was slower to take it up, but I would say that I can share stats. I don't know why, for whatever reason it was just slightly delayed in the growth year, but it's catching up very fast. And weirdly, you're finding the demographic of 35 to 55 was the fastest growing. So it's not really necessarily just an early adopter or younger generation thing. It's balanced across all demographics at the moment. So.
Nice. It's a great audience. Yeah, Canada's always a few months or years behind with fashion and those kinds of things. So yeah, can't blame us. You had mentioned designing as a great way to kind of better engage your audiences. Do you have any suggested local designers that you might use?
I would say sometimes I can send some suggestions if anybody's going to, nothing come to mind, but also photographers as well. Sometimes, having really good stills to go with your podcast, and there's so many good photographers locally as well. Most of the artists we've used, not all of them are in Atlantic Canada, but we are currently on the hunt for more kind of local artists, definitely.
Nice. Well, check our member directory on the Chamber's website. Quick plug there, because we definitely have a few great ones on there that we use all the time. Okay. Question. Does voice matter? Your voice is so calm and steady, which I enjoy listening to. Do listeners also appreciate the more passionate voice? Becky texted me during this webinar and said I could listen to him all day. So that's a large comment from everyone. That seems to be a trend.
Thank you. That's nice to the accent is the secret weapon, I guess. No, I think I think, there's some, I was talking to a podcaster a while back and he used to get a lot of negative reviews because people said they didn't like to listen to his voice. They said he was too, I think they said he was too nasal in the way he spoke, but I don't think that, I think that your voice might drives some people crazy. But to be honest, I think the majority of people wouldn't care, because if they really like what you're talking about and really like your style and your tone, that it's not a barrier to you launching a show. And again, people will not like your show for reasons you can never predict, and you'll get bad reviews for reasons you can never predict. But the majority of people will be fine. It's a weird thing. So he's got a really big laugh, and that really, some of our audience members love his laugh, and others don't. So you can't win, but the majority of people, if you're there for the right reasons, they'll I suppose they won't look through that. They'll listen through that and still just appreciate what you're doing. So
nice. Or just put on a fake accent. That'll work too.
Yeah.
I'm going to try that out for our next webinar. We have one more question about what the best technology is to have, and then the best way to market it so people listen. This is from Jamie from Shelter, Nova Scotia, and she says this would be a very interesting thing to do to educate the public on vulnerable populations.
Yeah, definitely. Again, I would say if whatever you have to hand, if you've got a smartphone and you can download an app like Anchor, then you can get going with that. But it depends how much. If you wanted to reach out to me and email me, I could make some really specific recommendations around a budget or around how you imagine you might record. The good news is there's a lot of options, and the price of podcasting kit has always been relatively low as well.
Perfect. We are at 11. We're not going to finish up because I have a bunch more questions here. So
that's fine. I can stick around.
He said he was cool to stay for a little bit longer. So let's get through them. You said you offer a service to get hosts on other podcasts as guests. What do you charge for that? And can you share any tricks of the trade?
We've literally just developed that package. I would say email me and I can send you over all the information. Jonathan, my business partner, has been really working on that for the last few days. So I don't have anything off the top of my head. I'm no use there, but I can get the information over to you. But I would say that listen to podcasts. If you're an expert in a particular field or you have a unique experience, try and find podcasters that are covering those topics or that kind of field of expertise. Or maybe you think your perspective could add something to this show. We help people build press kits that really highlight, these are the reasons, these are the topics I can talk, things I can talk about. Here's my social media profile, and just being really upfront with it. Making some podcasts do struggle to get guests, and organizing guests is quite a stress for them. So if you come to them with the right package, it can happen quite fast and be quite easy.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, we'll send a follow-up email out afterwards connecting you all with Rhys. How far ahead should you record podcasts?
I like to record well in advance and to have almost like a bulk of podcasts waiting to go out, just so that when they do go out, you can focus on the marketing and the promotion. When you get caught in a cycle where you're like, oh my God, we've got to do a show by Friday, that will affect the quality of a show, because you'll just grab whoever's available to be a guest, or you'll just be rushed in how you do it. And that's never the right way to do a podcast. You want more method behind it. So if you can record in advance, shows that are reacting to current affairs obviously don't have that luxury, but it doesn't mean you can't have a few backup shows that aren't necessarily tied to current events, just in case you get sick or you have a busy week, just so you can put that out instead. Listeners, if your show suddenly drops off the map and you don't post for a while without communicating that, like, you can say to an audience, oh, I'm going to be off. I'm sorry I wasn't there last week. I was ill, or I'm going on vacation, so you won't get a show for the next 2 weeks. People aren't assuming that you vanished or anything. Like, I think that one of the important things is that you just plan around your life, make a podcast that fits your lifestyle and your schedule, and then come up with solutions that mean that you can keep that constant flow of content in a way that isn't going to stress you out and make you get to the point where you hate podcasting and you don't want to do it because it's too much extra work on top of everything else. You've got to make the show fit your lifestyle and your workflow.
Perfect. Yeah, really good answer. That's kind of exactly what happened to me last year. Was weekly was just too much with all the other responsibilities that the chamber has. So we are looking at monthly shows, and then we can kind of build that excitement to say, oh, it's the end of the month, the chamber's going to put out a podcast episode.
I did a daily show for a while before Christmas, or a daily version of Canadian politics before Christmas.
Oh my gosh.
And that was intense and exhausting. But in the level of growth we had from doing a daily show was unbelievable. We actually trended at the #1 spot on Spotify because of the constant flow of content. It does enable, so it's kind of hard. You want to put more out because your show will grow faster, but also that is a lot of work. So balance
That's a
it.
crazy amount of work. Oh my God. Okay, yeah, I'm going for monthly, you're going for daily. I'll meet in the middle, I guess, and we'll do
Exactly.
bi-weekly. Another question from Curtis. How important would you say is it to record the show on video? Does it add flexibility to your channel strategy?
I think so, yeah. And also I think that those posts where you post like a 30-second clip, I gave the example of the waveform. If it's you and you've got a little Zoom screen like this and you're guest and you're talking, that's really good. It's really engaging. People get to see you and everything as well. The only thing, as I would say, is that it does add post-production elements to it, that if you're doing a pure audio podcast, the video element is something else to think about, is another layer. So just consider the additional workload the video can create. It's certainly like it is worth the time and investment, but just make sure you do have the time and the ability to invest in making it good and sounding good and kind of looking good as well. I do like video podcasts. Some people will watch podcasts on YouTube like they would a live stream rather than listening, so you can tap into that audience too. We actually experimented with a 360 VR version of our podcast, which you could actually watch on our YouTube channel. So we had a 360 camera in the middle of the table, and we just did a whole episode. And it's kind of stitched badly, but it was a good experiment. And we had like our YouTube channel is like only got like 250 subscribers, but that VR version got like 2,000 views within like 3 days, because it got optimized because it was a VR video on YouTube. So you can kind of really play about with how you might record your show. I haven't done any since, because again, it was more post-production, so I got busy.
It sounds like a very cool experiment, and now I really want to try.
Yeah.
Another question that says, when you interview people, do you give them the details of the interview objectives and the questions you plan to ask?
Yeah, and I think especially if your podcast is geared around educational learning, I would say have a menu in the description that basically says, in this episode, we cover this, 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 and this. So someone will look at that and go, I'm going to listen to the show, and in 25 minutes, I will learn about these topics. So it's a very nice way to really package and give them all the information off the top. And likewise, at the top of the episode, you can always briefly touch on those same points, so that there's an agreement. If you listen to the end of the show, you're going to walk away with this knowledge. So I would certainly say, if you're building around education and just sort of sharing expertise, being that structured is a real must, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question. Is there a suggested streamlined way to do one recording and have it fit all platforms? So, example, you do a video, you turn it into a podcast, turn it into a blog. This person has a radio show that he pre-records, a blog site, and a Facebook page group. Interested in tips on how to streamline all those efforts.
Yeah, so Zencaster and Squadcast, the two examples I gave, if you recorded your show on there, you would then be able to, that would create the video and the audio on one platform. If you've got a radio show and you've got the audio from the radio show, I think Libsyn, for instance, it does allow you to post on multiple platforms. So it does allow you to do a YouTube post as well as a podcast post. You might just need to have, it might be a combination of like maybe using Hootsuite or one of those, like, or Buffer or one of those platforms alongside for the social media. You might just have to program it. But once you've got the audio or the video in one place, it should be quite easy to distribute. Again, reach out to me, and I could always help you kind of iron out a plan, because there are so many different tools and different ways of doing it. It depends on how you get in the audio and all those other elements too, and how you might be able to, there are workflows I could share with you that might help. They're a bit more bespoke.
Perfect. There was a platform you recommended to us last year, because we were just doing audio and we wanted to put it on YouTube, and it made those little audio wave visuals.
That would be Headliner. Yeah.
Headliner, that's it. Yeah, that was really great. And you could even customize the color. So we put in our branding, like the blue and orange, and that worked out really well. Yeah. And that just took away any of the pressure of the video recording.
and that's the thing. I think I only spoke about it in the context of doing online social media, like little 60-second clips, it will allow you to do a full episode as well. So you can get a video generated of a full, 30, 60-minute, however long your episode is too. So you can auto-generate videos to then be posted live too.
Yeah, really solid tool. If you want to see an example, you can go to our YouTube channel and look at
There you
last
go.
year's podcast. We've taken a year sabbatical, but it's going to be fun because we're going to make a comeback. I think you answered this, but we'll ask it again. Do you offer a service of connecting folks with content with folks that have the voice and the technology? So I guess connecting a potential podcast startup with the people who already have the technology and maybe the hosting capabilities.
Yeah, so we often produce shows. So that means working with a company or a brand to kind of find the right host. So it might not be you being the person making the show. And what we'll do is we'll say, like the Love Map for Charm Diamond Centers, we got Nancy Regan, the broadcaster, to come in, and she hosts it. She does the interviews. So sometimes, you might not have the right voice or the right perspective that you want. You might want an experienced broadcaster to come in and host the show. Or maybe you find a particular talent or a particular voice that you want to nurture and be part of it, and their perspective is really adds something to what you're trying to do. There's the ability to kind of make those choices creatively and help frame your show better with the right kind of voices and host and everything is really important. So it's something we really prioritize when we're developing shows with clients.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We've got one last question here. How should one prepare before deciding to start a podcast? Should I plan many episodes at once? I think you touched on this a little bit, but maybe just a little refresher.
It depends what suits you. Some people like doing one and then doing another one a couple of days later. I like to record episodes in bulk. It just seems to fit my schedule. So I'll do like 4 episodes at once because they're only 25, 30 minutes long. I'll just book like a 3-hour session with some breaks in between. There's no right or wrong way. It just depends what suits you. But again, having those backup episodes is a real, really kind of good thing to have as a fallback. I would say that, if you're going to start recording and start doing a show, I did this last week. There's 2 comedians I work with in the UK, and they want to start a rugby podcast, and they didn't quite know what it was going to be. So we just did a session where we just recorded, and they'll never be released. And from that, we came up with a bunch of notes and really refined what the format is and the voices. Do we need a third host? As an experiment, I would say to start recording yourself into your phone, just talking about a topic, or as a pilot, as a test run. And you might never release that. You probably won't release it, or maybe you will if it really surprised you and you were kind of really happy with it. And just show it to people you trust, or people who will give you really good constructive feedback. You don't have to start. Your first time you ever record shouldn't be your first episode that goes out. I would say do some test runs, make sure you're comfortable and confident, and that you really hone your idea a bit more in your process. Even just your microphone technique, the more time you spend recording, the more confident you get, the more comfortable, the more just polished you'll sound on the microphone as well. So if you can do a little bit of that work before you launch, it'll really help strengthen that launch as well.
Great. Okay. Let's wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Rhys. I'm just laughing at the microphone comment because I'm famous for the overactive P's, like the puh sound. So the AirPods are really helping. Yeah, they're really helping manage that today. So shout out to Apple. So thank you all for sticking with us as we answered the rest of your questions. I think that we have answered the burning question today, which is, should we start a podcast? And it seems that the answer is yes for about 50 people. So that's exciting. Rhys, you got a busy week ahead of you.
Yay. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been really helpful and exciting. And I think a lot of people are really excited about podcasts. And I like what you said about going to listen to a few to just get that inspiration, because the more you listen, you think, oh, I like what he did here. I like the intro he did. And you'll just find, you'll find some stuff that works for you. So what's today? Thursday. Tomorrow morning, we have a refresher going on, a refresher webinar of all the available COVID-19 funding programs that are out there for you and your business. So hop on tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. and Patrick will give a big run through of that. We also have a full week next week of webinars happening. So you can check that out at halifaxchamber.com/events. This webinar was recorded and it'll be available to all attendees shortly on YouTube. Likely look for it tomorrow or Monday. Have a great day, everybody. Have a great week, and we will see you next time. Thanks for coming.